What else is on my mind? The ideologies associated with these Discord users. That's what else is on my mind, because that's what I'm going to talk about now. Um, so let's talk about that. So for example, one of the old guard, one of my old online friends that I met in the Debaters Lounge, who used to be in my server, started off as a tanky actually, but probably the Hakim kind. Finnish Bolshevik Hakim Luna Oi, Paul Moron, Jason Unruhe kind, German Gonzalo kind. We used to have a few of those people. The cringe kind of Maoism, ultra leftist deviationist Maoism, to be specific. But then he gradually morphed. He went through a gradual morph into a fucking anarcho-primitivist. Can you believe that? I watched before my eyes this ML supposedly transform into a Ted Kaczynski-ite monkey mode anarcho-primitivist before my very eyes. It's like you flipped 180. It's like this guy flipped, did a total U-turn on his fucking ideology, bro. And like, we need to talk about that, because I think the roots of his anprimism were always there in his quote-unquote Maoism, his quote-unquote Marxist-Leninism, because the label that best fits that description, his description, would actually be, from a Marxist point of view, reactionary socialism. People don't understand, and honestly, people don't talk about this enough. The fact that for Marxists, and really in general, objectively speaking, there have always been other kinds of socialism than Marxism. Like, Marxism is a very specific thing. It's a very specific tradition within socialism as a whole. It's not that Marxism is socialism and socialism is Marxism in this kind of brain dead A equals A kind of thing. There have always been, like, socialism didn't begin with Marx. People, like, college, it's such a travesty. PhDs and college professors call Marx a utopian, or call Lenin and Stalin, etc., utopians. But they're literally not. The utopian socialists were completely fucking different from the Marxists and Marx in his day. They preceded Marxism. They were before Marxism, and they're really. I wish I could say that they're a thing of the past, but really, that's wishful thinking, isn't it? Because we have utopian socialism everywhere, especially in the West. Most people who describe themselves to be and self-purport to be socialists are probably actually just utopian socialists. And the key fundamental distinction is that utopian socialists want to impose an ideal society on reality. And Marxists don't want to do that. Marx literally says in the German ideology, where he lays out the foundations of his materialist philosophy, in contradistinction to the other young Hegelians that he was surrounded by, he literally says that communism is not an ideal that we seek to impose upon society as it is. It is rather the real movement resulting from premises already in existence towards the sublation, not abolition, but sublation of the present state of things. Communism is a reality, it's not an idea. That's the key difference between Marxists and utopian socialists. You can basically think about it in those terms. Utopian socialists take socialism to be a fucking idea that they've contrived in their minds from premises resulting within their own fucking minds. And Marxists take socialism to be a reality, a real movement towards the absolute uprooting of the existing order and the solidification of a new order, a real order, okay? So the fundamental difference there is that communism for Marxists isn't a fucking utopia. It isn't. It's not a perfect society. It's not a fucking heavenly dream. It's not a religious concept. It's a fucking mode of production, alright? Now, usually when those academic types call Marx a utopian, they're completely ignorant of this distinction. They're completely ignorant of the realities of Marxism and what Marx actually wrote. But what they're saying is basically, oh, Marx said a bunch of stuff about the quote-unquote abolition of private property, etc. And they see that, for these academic liberals, that is a utopian goal. Because what they mean by utopian is colloquial. It isn't a technical term at all. What they mean by utopian is just impossible and idyllic. Which is fucking stupid, and I cannot imagine giving somebody who talks like that a fucking PhD in anything. But whatever. That's the state of leftist academia. Or the state of Western academia, I should say. And utopian socialism, I think, describes the state of the left as a whole right now. Besides us tankies, I suppose. But with that out of the way, one of the things that people often ask me, because, I was talking about how people ask me, oh, what's your position on this? What's your position on that? What's your position on this, that, and the other thing? One of them is, people say, Madeline, what's your position on libertarianism? What do you think of libertarians? And I think libertarians, here's my position on libertarians. Let's get into this, because it ties into everything that I've just been talking about. Because I used to be kind of a libertarian, right? So, I think libertarians are actually correct on a lot of fundamental issues, and very consistently so. Like the Libertarian Party publicly denounced sending money to Ukraine. Ron Paul denounces the fucking Anglo-American Empire all the time. They're actually kind of based on anti-imperialist issues. On those kind of anti-imperialist, anti-deep state, anti-military industrial complex issues, libertarians, like true libertarians, are very consistently correct and aligned somehow spontaneously with Marxist-Leninists on those issues. Like, we agree on that stuff. But that's really only the tip of the iceberg of my perspective on libertarians as a whole, because it's almost like libertarians also themselves constitute, in their very, libertarian theory, setting aside, getting more intellectual and setting aside the fucking, real, actually existing libertarian party, in their theory, in their way of conceiving of the world, their general worldview, their general cosmology, they're also idealist and utopian. That's really the big issue with libertarians, is that actually they who accuse Marxists of being utopians are actually the true utopians. Because where in the fuck has fucking total full, like, they have this image, this idea of a perfect society, of full capitalism, right? True quote unquote capitalism, right? It's just like how leftists Anglo-box communism, and they say this dogmatic written down set of principles is what communism is. And if something in reality doesn't map on to my list of principles, then it can't possibly be communist, even if it fucking calls itself that, and even if it fucking constitutes a real movement towards the sublation of the current state of things. It can't possibly be communist because blah blah blah, it hasn't met the checklist that exists in my fucking head, right? Libertarians think the exact same way with a different society in their heads. They think the exact same fucking way. They think, oh, pure capitalism, free markets, actually free markets, as opposed to quote-unquote crony capitalism, or fucking quote-unquote monopoly capitalism, or fucking quote-unquote corporatism, right? Which are all of those labels are just words they use to describe actually existing capitalism, which is the ironic part. Like, capitalism as it has actually developed throughout the real material history of the world, they call something other than capitalism because it doesn't meet their criterion of what capitalism means that they contrived from their heads. Just like communists who denounce China and the Soviet Union, it's the same exact thing. It's just one of them is on the nominal left and one of them is on the nominal right. It's the same. They're the same exact utopians. They're just like the utopian socialist theorists of the olden times before Marxism. They're just like them. And I think that's a very apt description of libertarianism as a whole. It's a kind of failed opposition to the status quo. Because it's utopian in nature. And it's idealist in its character. Idealist in its fucking character. So here I am. I'm just a materialist girl in an idealist world, bro. I'm surrounded by idealists. I can't handle it. I can't stand the utopianism. Read Marx. That's another thing. Libertarians piss me off. As much as we might agree on, like, oh yeah, we should end the drug war. We all just kind of want to be left alone, socially. Like, your sexuality is a private matter. We should end imperialism. We should blow up the deep state. And all that stuff. We might agree on those kind of concrete, important issues, right? But on an interpersonal level, they just annoy the fuck out of me. They just irritate the shit out of me. And that's fine. Like, politics isn't really about friendship. But fuck, bro. These libertarians, these lol-libertarians, just really piss me off to no end. God damn it. Bernie Sanders still texts me, by the way. For some reason, I'm still on his texting roster. We must create the nation of, by, and for the working class we know we can become. Join Bernie at 8:30 Eastern Time live from Labor Notes in Chicago. No, I'm fine. I'm good, thanks. Stop texting me, Bernie. Stop texting me, Grandpa. I'm fucking over it. Oh, Jesus Christ. What was I gonna say? How is it that they piss me off? I fucking forgot what I was gonna say about that. Think there's any way for a real tanky movement to develop in Western Europe? The system seems to disable the best. We have a sock that is masquerading as trots and fringe Gonzaloite LARPers. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's always potential for a real tanky movement to develop everywhere. Because I believe it's really the like correct position to take. I just think that ideological flip-flop confuses people. Like, there's a political realignment happening. And I guess I can't really speak for Europe, but it seems pretty analogous, right? Because you have, like, let's take the French election for an example. Mélenchon was basically Bernie Sanders in France. Macron is basically Biden, right? And then Le Pen, you could say, represents a kind of Trump right-wing populism. Now, Mélenchon made the mistake of, after losing, which is in itself connotes a huge list of mistakes that he must have made, right? The mistake of endorsing Macron instead of Le Pen, right? So what you should do is make common cause with the kind of nationalist, patriotic populists and really bring them over to see the light of Marxist-Leninism. That's really it, you know? He was slightly better, yeah, but it's like same. It's quite analogous, especially in their very similar behavior after losing, and in the fact that they lost, right? Like in their anti-popular character, relatively speaking, after their losses, you know, there's quite a stark similarity there, I think. But you're going to see a political realignment happening where people who look ideologically right-wing are the ones that are going to have to come to the tanky side. So, and the ones who appear ideologically left-wing are just going to become more and more fascistic and more like West supremacist, Atlanticist, and supportive of imperialism. And actually becoming the perpetrators and the fucking flag wavers for it. You know? Like, that's already happening. All of that is already happening beneath our noses. What would the Russia-Ukraine special operation? That's what I'm thinking right now. But yeah, libertarianism. Utopian socialism. Let's get into this a little bit more. Let's delve a little deeper, shall we? Because, like I said, there are other socialisms than Marxism. There always have been, because socialism predates Marx's birth. um, and, yeah. Engels wrote about it. Engels wrote about this. From Engels' Principles of Communism. Let's get this up here. From Engels' Principles of Communism. How am I looking right now? This is kind of a polemic that he wrote for the purpose of hold on, let me put my thing back down here. There we go. For the purpose of clarifying the positions of the communist movement of the day, right? So down here, he poses a bunch of rhetorical questions that he then answers, or not rhetorical, like questions that he then as if he's sort of in a dialogue with somebody asking him questions about communism, right? So the penultimate one, number 24, how do communists differ from socialists? The so-called socialists are divided into 3 categories. Reactionary, bourgeois socialists, and democratic socialists. That's not a new thing. They have existed since Engels. And they're not communists. So let's get into it a little bit more. And let's try to see how the contemporary kind of ideological groupings of people fit into this schema of understanding. So the first category, reactionary socialists, consists of adherents of a feudal and patriarchal society which has already been destroyed and is still daily being destroyed by big industry and world trade, and their creation, bourgeois society. This category includes, from the evils of existing society, that feudal and patriarchal society must be restored because it was free of such evils. In one way or another, all their proposals are directed towards this end. So what is he saying there? Basically, he's describing the kind of person who wants to return to to a former stage of development of society. Wants to go back in time because the evils of contemporary capitalist society did not exist there. And that is their essential political project, the reactionary socialists, is to somehow reverse human history and go back in time. And usually, honestly, here's how this combines with utopianism. Like I called that Maoist who became an Anprim a utopian. Here's how it works. Not even feudal or patriarchal society, but literally tribal, like monkey society is what he wanted to return to. Like their whole thing is that return to monkey meme, right? That is a form of reactionary socialism because you just want to go back to primitive communism. And more often than not, it's actually kind of an idyllic past. Like they're idealizing the past. And Engels actually kind of says this, I think. Yeah, he says They seek to establish the rule of the aristocracy, the guild masters, the small producers, and their retinue of absolute or feudal monarchs, officials, soldiers, and priests. A society which was, to be sure, free of the evils of present-day society, but which brought it at least as many evils without even offering to the oppressed workers the prospect of liberation through a communist revolution. Because obviously you can't have a communist revolution before capitalism develops, right? Like, you just, like, that just makes no fucking sense at all. So it's actually an idyllic past that they imagine and that they idealize, that they want to return to. It's not even, they have a vision of the past that they think they want to return to, but that doesn't accurately reflect the way that those societies, tribal, feudal, or otherwise, actually were, and the fact that those societies were just as evil as capitalist society is. And that's a really key thing to understand, I think, when it comes to being a Marxist, because we're not moralizing. It's not about morals, dude. It's not a moral critique. And reactionary socialists, as all these kind of types of utopians basically do, is they have these moral critiques. Like, oh, we need to return to feudalism because of feminism or some shit. Some culture war nonsense, right? Like, oh, culture was more united and religious and patriarchal back in the feudal monarchist times. So we must go back there because capitalism uprooted all of those social realities. Well, actually, in a converse sense, you're going to find just as many ills in that society as we have now. Like, all these kind of things aren't new, bro. Like that's the thing. Certain things are new. Evil is not new. Like, that, you could apply that category in any fucking material reality context. Because it's not material. Yeah. So, a lot of libertarians, I think, kind of fit this description. As well, in some kind of perverse sense. Of a reactionary socialist. Which are like the two things that they would claim, oh, I'm not that. But like, if you want to somehow go back in time, like these NRX weirdos who idealize feudalism and all this stuff, you're a reactionary socialist. Because you can't go back in time. You're striving for something which is entirely impossible. The conditions of contemporary society are not going to give rise to something resembling the past. It's just not the case. Except for in the form of what Yanis Varoufakis has called techno-feudalism, which is actually a new thing. Like, it's not like oh, we're going back in time. It's a new development, right? With these platforms that completely like socially control your data that you produce every day by using the platform, but you don't get any of the profit from fucking using the platform. They get all the profit. That's like basically what he means by techno-feudalism, right? But that's all kind of adjacent and adjunct and besides the present point that I'm making. But we also have bourgeois socialists. Second category consists of adherents of present-day society who have been frightened for its future by the evils to which it necessarily gives rise. What they want, therefore, is to maintain the society while getting rid of the evils which are an inherent part of it. To this end, some propose mere welfare measures, while others come forward with grandiose systems of reform which, under the pretense of reorganizing society, are in fact intended to preserve the foundations and hence the life of existing society. Communists must unremittingly struggle against these bourgeois socialists because they work for the enemies of communists and protect the society which communists aim to overthrow. So who does that sound like? Who does that sound like? Sounds like Democrats, doesn't it? It sounds like the Democratic Party. It sounds like liberals. It sounds to me like liberalism, basically, or bourgeois socialists, because they want to harmonize the contradictions that exist within modern society, right? The material organization of the modern world. They want to harmonize those contradictions somehow, which is impossible to do. And then they want to like make some kind of ideal state out of what they perceive to be the existing world by getting rid of the bad parts and keeping all the good ones. Sorry, this is just another side of that bad moral critique. Communists don't want to keep some of the bad or get rid of the bad of existing society and keep the good. We want to get rid of the whole thing. We want to move on to something entirely new. Like, that's the point. And notice how Engels poses the bourgeois socialists explicitly as enemies of the communists. Because if you want to save this system just for the sake of saving this system, then you're obviously an enemy of a communist, because a communist is definitionally against this fucking system. But to be honest with you, libertarians could also be bourgeois socialists in the sense that they want to fix capitalism. They want to get rid of the cronies and monopolies, etc. And then we can just have real free markets. But what Lenin showed is part of his analysis of imperialism, which he called at that point the highest stage of capitalism, is that capitalism just developed through the course of its development from mechanisms that were inherent to itself to be monopolistic and quote-unquote crony. Like, that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is monopolistic. It tends towards monopoly, partially because of the falling rate of profit and the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. So you got these huge corporations like Amazon, etc. But here's the thing: no matter how much a libertarian or what have you virtue signals to be against those things, if they just want to get rid of that and fix capitalism to make it pure or whatever, then they're not actually communists. They're not actually fighting the present state of things. They're just bourgeois socialists. They're just little reformers. And I mean, I hope all of that kind of fucking makes sense to people, because all of the terms, if you don't really have a grasp, it seems paradoxical and contradictory to you and like whatever, blah blah blah. Just don't be stupid, you know? Just don't be stupid. Then we have the Democratic Socialist, the third category. They favor some of the same measures the communists advocate, not as part of the transition to communism, however, but as measures which they believe will be sufficient to abolish the misery and evils of present-day society. So they're similar to the bourgeois socialists in that sense. These democratic socialists are either proletarians who are not yet sufficiently clear about the conditions of the liberation of their class, they are representatives of the petty bourgeoisie, a class which, prior to the achievement of democracy and the socialist measures to which it gives rise, has many interests in common with the proletariat. It follows that, in moments of action, the communists will not come to an understanding with these democratic socialists, and in general to follow as far as possible a common policy with them. Provided that these socialists do not enter into the service of the ruling bourgeoisie and attack the communists, it is clear that this form of cooperation and action does not exclude the discussion of differences. So who does this fit? Literally, the people who call themselves democratic socialists today still fit the description that Engels offered originally. And what have they done? They've entered into the service of the ruling bourgeoisie and attacked the communists. That's all those people on Twitter who attack infrared. That's them. They're democratic socialists. And this also kind of fits libertarians too, right? We have all three on the checklist. Because a lot of them are proletarians who are not yet clear about the conditions of the liberation of their class. They think that one of these other answers, the reactionary or the bourgeois answer, or even just the reformist answer, measures they believe will be sufficient to abolish the misery and evils of present-day society, right? That's what they believe in. That's what they want. And you know, to me, the worst kind of people in the infrared orbit, the worst kind of Haas orbiter, are the people who are like, oh, I like you, Haas, because I like your critique of liberalism. I like your critique of liberalism. But otherwise, I think you should drop the communism. I think you should be a Nazi like me. Well, guess what, Nazi asshole? You are literally just another symptom and just another fucking part of the liberalism you proclaim to hate so much. You're just the limit of its contours, dude. You're just what happens to liberalism when it becomes incapable of enforcing itself with its own measures. You're just the resolution of that contradiction, you fucking white nationalist weirdos, bro. They're the same thing as anarchists. It's the same kind of thing, materially speaking. Ideology aside. And all those people in Haas's orbit are reactionary socialists, essentially. Because they're like, oh, I like your critique of liberalism. I like your critique of present society, Marxists, but I just want to go back to some idealized past instead of actually advancing things forward. It's just so fucking stupid. And really, that's it. Like, one of the things to clarify, I think this will clarify the entire past hour 45-minute rant that I've been on. One of the things that will clarify that is this. Materialists basically think, we Marxists basically take the line that you have to change society first in order to change people's ideas in their minds. In order to change the way people think, you have to change the material conditions of their society. Societal change is a prerequisite for ideological change. Whereas our opponents, the idealists and utopians in all three of these socialist categories, reactionary, bourgeois, or democratic, these idealists think that when we change things in people's heads, only then will society change, and that's just completely fucking backwards. They have it completely fucking backwards. So hopefully all of that is clarified what we're doing here. And now I have to go get some more water for my throat. So let's see. Maybe we'll just go back to the Soviet footage. All the idealists have behind them is an army of socialist slacktivists. Yeah. All right.